Daily Bible Time, Monday morning. Good morning, it's Dominic Steele, and it was good to be back at Village Church yesterday. We start the term next Sunday, the new term 3, with a new series on the Great Rescue from the book of Exodus, and I'm looking forward to that and hope you can be with us for that today. And all this week, I'm going to read through at 50 pages a day the new book to be released by my friend Al Stewart. It's going to be released next week, and the book is called The Manual, Getting Masculinity Right, and I'm interviewing Al on the Pastor's Heart on Tuesday next week, so I'm just going to, between 6 and 7 each weekday, read through the book and summarise and think about a couple of topics that, and I'll give you a summary of this morning's 50 pages in just a few minutes, but I'm just up to page 47, and Al finishes chapter 2 with this line: masculinity is fundamentally about how men use their power. When it's done in a healthy way, masculinity will serve and bless those it touches. Now, Al wants us to value masculinity, rightly understood, but he acknowledges there's massive confusion about what masculinity is. So here's the structure of the book. This is the subject headings, the chapter headings. 1, confusion reigns. 2, masculinity under attack. 3, from the Maker's Manual. 4, initiation from boys to men. 5, how to look after future you. And 6, endurance, the power of just turning up. That's the first half of the book. And then the second half of the book is healthy masculinity lived out as a son, as a friend, as a workmate, as a single man, a husband, and a father. And so far I've just read the first 2 chapters, Confusion Reigns and Under Attack, and actually the defining illustration of the first chapter, Confusion Reigns, is noting how the portrayal of masculinity has changed in our lifetimes just through the lens of TV sitcoms, from The Dad and the Brady Bunch, where Mike Brady was a bit of a dag, but he was engaged with his family. He was the wise go-to man who is ultimately charged with sorting out the problems in family life. And then Howard Cunningham in Happy Days loved his family, who was an ever-present source of stability for Richie and the Fonz. He was the non-anxious, wise presence that his family needed. But by 1987, with Married with Children, Al Bundy was a husband who was a useless slob. Homer Simpson was entirely clueless in The Simpsons. As Leonard Sachs said, Al quotes Leonard Sachs saying, "Homer's always an idiot. Marge is practical. The most intelligent character is the daughter Lisa." Now, in Everybody Loves Raymond, the male character is thoughtless, stupid, and useless. In Family Guy, Peter Griffin is Homer Simpson without any of Homer's redeeming qualities. And then, to finish the narrative, Peppa Pig, enormously popular with little kids. Daddy Pig is described by Esquire magazine as a bespectacled pink blob with a booming voice who's an unqualified disaster when it comes to map reading, DIY, and barbecues, 3 skills that men might traditionally be expected to possess. His favourite pastimes are lying on a sofa watching TV, sitting in the sun reading, and eating large amounts of chocolate cake. Al tells of reading his teenagers a book series where the main thread of the series seemed to be, he says, to point out that dads were idiots. And so he just said, why am I teaching my children that dads are idiots? They stopped reading the series. Now, there's the illustration. But there's an argument, a concern, that as Al quotes Leonard Sachs, scholars might look at the cultural disintegration manifest in the first half of the 21st century and conclude that a fundamental cause of the unravelling of our social fabric was the neglect of gender in the raising of our children. And still quoting Leonard Sachs, most cultures have taken great care in teaching gender norms. We no longer do. On the contrary, learned professors now actively deconstruct and tear down every gender guidepost. And there's an observation, as Al Stewart quotes Carol Hooven in her book Testosterone, that while men are more likely to commit violent crime, they're also likely to risk lives in trying to save others, even strangers. Now, the bottom line of this opening chapter is that men who become dangerous, this is the argument, become dangerous not because their masculinity is toxic, but because their humanity is toxic. these men lack the sense of purpose and moral framework to show them how to use their strength well. Here's a quote from Al on the wrong sort of masculinity. He says, "I've known men who are big and strong and yet have hearts the size of a pea. A man who uses size and strength to intimidate other people is a very small man indeed. For all the sexual conquests in the world are not worth comparing with the intimacy a man creates when he keeps his lifelong promise to be faithful and intimate with just one woman. And ironically, the man who measures himself by the size of his bank balance will never have enough money to seem big in his own eyes." Now, in the second chapter, Al summarizes attacks or critiques on masculinity. 1, the attack that all masculinity is toxic. 2, that the patriarchy is evil. 3, that masculinity needs to be feminized. And as Al responds to those criticisms, he gives a hint to where the book is going to go. He calls out for men to live out a healthy masculinity. He says the more men will sacrificially love and care for those around them, the safer our society will be for everyone, especially the vulnerable. The man who has a healthy masculinity is concerned to care for others. The man who understands his masculinity and uses it to serve others is stronger in many ways. And people who know him, especially the women in his life, will rejoice in this. Why? The truly masculine man makes the people around him feel safe. Things are more stable because he's around. They know he's committed to caring for them in whatever way is needed, however he can. And then Al finishes the chapter by saying masculinity matters. The more we trash masculinity in the eyes of boys, the more we remove the inspiration to become strong men. The chapter ends with a quote from Jordan Peterson on valuing masculinity. Peterson says, "I tell my students, aim to be the person at your father's funeral that everyone in their grief and misery can rely on. There's a worthy and noble ambition. Strengthen the faiths of adversity. That is very different to the wish for a life free of trouble." And then Al moves from Jordan Peterson to Jesus Christ in Mark 10. Jesus calls them together, verse 42 of Mark 10. "You know that those who are regarded by rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be the slave of all. Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So we're back at that line from Al, that masculinity is fundamentally about how men use their power when it's done in a healthy way to serve. Masculinity will serve and bless those that it touches. So that's the introductory 2 chapters of the manual, Getting Masculinity Right, from Al Stewart. And next chapter, we go to the Bible in chapter 3. And what does the Bible say, or from the Maker's Manual, what does the Bible say about masculinity? That's tomorrow on Daily Bible Time.